Okay, Nick, this is from at TOLDNMCR. I don't know how you pronounce that. On a scale of best man to would you have a beer with him, how much of a mate is Ollie Bell?
Yeah, we bought a horse together a while back, Ollie and I, and we did a podcast together a few years ago with him and Tom Stanley. So I was flattered to be asked to go on with two sort of heavyweights of the industry to even do a podcast, and that lasted a year or so, and we had good fun doing it. But I just would say, if you're a really good mate, you'd turn up at their wedding, wouldn't you? And you didn't show up at mine.
Well, no, from good mates,
some excuse.
Right, the next part of his question is, are you still committed to tweeting Dominic Cummings even though nobody else gets it?
Yeah, so the background to that is, and people that don't follow me on Twitter will wonder what the hell it is about. The background to that is actually, I was with Ollie and a couple of other mates out once, and we were laughing about someone who always tweets like really famous people with millions of followers with obviously no hope of ever getting a reply. And they carried on doing it. Like this, don't they realise this looks silly because they're always tweeting these famous people? And so, kind of as a parody of that, as a little spin-off, I started replying to Dominic Cummings because he's a bit of a madman, and he had all that stuff during lockdown, and kind of to take the piss a bit, I just kept replying to him. And then people kept saying, "You've got to carry on doing this now until he replies." So every now and again, I'll just send him a mad reply about what's his thoughts on a snooker final, or what should I do about my kids who don't like football, and things like that. And he never replies. He's probably muted me or something, but I will carry on now until so yes, I'm totally committed to replying to Dominic Cummings until he replies to me. Yeah.
And what price you bet yourself getting a reply?
Oh, it's 1,000 now. It just can't happen.
Okay, right. C player would like to know: do you explain your profession in social situations such as parents at kids' school, etc., or just embellish a wild, boring cover story not to encourage further questions on punting from the public?
A good question. So I sort of slightly alter the spiel based on the person involved and my own mood. So none of it would be a lie. So predominantly, I bet for myself. So sometimes I'll say I'm a professional gambler. But also I've got a sort of close involvement with Rory Campbell, and Rory's his own data company, and do a little bit of consultancy within the sort of sports betting and data environment. And so if I'm not in the mood to say I'm a professional gambler, I can just say I work within data in professional sports, and a part of the time I do. Sometimes I just can't face explaining professional punters and the questions that come with it. So I might duck out of it in certain situations, but I never lie.
Brendan Thayer would like to know: with the big firms now controlling the horse racing betting shows and the liquidity on Betfair decreasing every day, could we see the return of bigger on-course business in the UK and Irish racecourses?
Yeah, to some extent, maybe. I think there might be a little bit of a revival on the racecourse, but also it's 2022 and not 1992, and I think there's the way the public are now. There's a high percentage of people who just won't travel big distances to get a bet on, like they would have done in the 80s and 90s. Now maybe these big players will send runners and they'll be able to get on course that way, but that still comes with logistical issues, doesn't it? And so I have my doubts that you'll ever see. You'll never see the sort of thriving betting ring that you knew from your early days. But could there be a bit of a revival? Yes. The second part of that is, do we actually have the on-course layers now willing to stand positions bigger than they're able to the people will be able to build on in the exchange if they're unable to hedge them back themselves to the same extent? I know there are still some out there, decent sized on-course layers, but a lot of them are sort of nudging and nurdling these days and giving them back to the exchange and just trying to lock in and not willing to take big positions. So for there to be a really vibrant racecourse market again, you're actually going to need a few more, I'd imagine, on-course layers that are willing to go into races with big positions.
Yeah, I will point in there are more than enough to accommodate the current business at the moment. People that will take it.
Oh, completely agree with that. But if it wanted to get much bigger and you wanted to have a hell of a lot of people going and playing into the ring, as a result of exchanges almost dying out, there being no exchange liquidity for anyone to hedge into, then the model's got to change again, and you've got to go back to how it was 30 or 40 years ago. I don't know how much appetite there would be for that. As much as I'd like to see it, I think it would be great.
Yeah, okay, me too. Reprobates would like to know, what have you learnt to stop doing to improve your punting? And that's the first part of his question. I'll go for it in little bits.
Now, this will be weird and will be the opposite of what a lot of people would say here, but what I have stopped to improve my punting is actually being a bit too conservative. A lot of people will be the other way around. They might have been rash in their early years, or didn't control their bankroll very well. I was the other way around. When I left the industry and decided I was going to make a go of it as a pro punter, so the way I left, and I was sort of forced out of Ladbrokes Coral in the merger, and I sort of had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder at the time, in that I'll show everyone that I can do this. And so therefore I had a sort of I cannot fail at this, because I didn't want to go back into the industry. I'm not trained to do anything else. If I failed at professional punting, my life was it wasn't in the best state, to be honest. What would I do next? I'd have to retrain or do something completely different. I didn't want to. This is what I wanted to do. So I had to succeed at it. And in the first couple of years, I didn't push my edges as much as I should have done, because I didn't want any huge positions, because I just wanted to make enough, more than I was making working. And I was quite happy with that the first year or two. And then the last couple of years, I feel like, well, I've obviously made a success of this. I'm doing well. I need to now up this and try to move to the next level. And so I had to teach myself to have more on in spots where I feel like I've got 4 or 5% edge, where I was betting X before. Now I need to up it and go bigger. And that was actually quite tough, because I think this will sound weird to people who just know me from Twitter and things like that, but I'm not actually a natural risk taker. I don't relish taking risks and having big positions and having a load of money riding on a game. I don't actually enjoy it. I just want it over. I guess to that extent, so when people say things, when you tell people what you do and they ask you, oh, are you addicted? I'm the opposite of addicted. I don't really like it. When it's time to have my last bet, I'm out and I'm done. So weirdly, that the answer to that question for me is that I've learned to be a bit more aggressive, and I've learned that off people that do it. And that was one of my learnings off some other people is calculated risk at the right time.
Okay, he also wants to know, what was the most ridiculous bet you've ever had?
Ridiculous. Well, I guess the situation that always comes to mind is ridiculous, bad, whatever you want to call it. One of the biggest bets I had in my life at the time in the 2014 World Cup was the Brazil-Germany semi-final, where I was absolutely convinced that Brazil were completely the wrong price. Slight underdogs at home. It was a home game because the World Cup was in their country. They played at home to Germany in the semi-final. Germany, I didn't think had been great in that tournament all the way through. A couple of rounds before, they had to go to extra time to beat Algeria. They'd drawn a group game against Ghana. I just didn't think Germany were that good. But Brazil had their best player, Neymar, suspended, and their best defender, no, he was injured, sorry, and their best defender, Thiago Silva, was suspended. 2 huge losses. And I thought the market had completely overreacted to these 2 players being out. And I made Brazil like a quarter goal favourite, and they were slight underdogs. And being a World Cup semi-final, you could get on what you wanted. And so I did. And they were 5-0 down after half an hour and lost the game 7-1. And it was probably in the top 3 or 4 biggest bets I'd had in my life at the time. And they got beat 7-1. And all of my mates, sort of casual football fans, were pre-match were, what the hell are you backing Brazil for here? With these 2 players out, they'll get beat. And I was like, I know better. And that was a case where your man on the street just knew better. And I was completely wrong. That was no good.
Okay, this is the final part of Reprobate's question. I assume this is an in-joke. He's attending this year's Bobby Moore Fund Celebrity Sports Quiz. Any strategical advice?
Strategical advice. Drink all the red wine before some other bugger does. Well, not my finest moment when I made a bit of a show of myself there. But we'll move on.
Yeah, moving swiftly on. Analytics Turf would like to know, after watching the very informative Matthew Trenhale interviews, I've come away from those thinking, hold on, I'm playing somebody else's game here. What advice would you give the little guys to scrape a long-term profit?
Yeah, that's good. And Matthew's interview was so good. He just speaks so well about the industry. I can't match the way that he speaks, and his sort of in-depth passion for everything to do with betting. You know, I sort of compartmentalise on certain subjects I want to know all about, and other things I let go over my head. Whereas Matthew just follows everything and knows everything and has a view on everything. That's what I think. I'm in awe of him for doing that. So yeah, you will watch Matthew's interviews and think, you know, this guy, you know, some people are on a different level to me, and you have to. So what I would say here is, know which game you're playing. If you feel like sort of taking on a mature market, like we talked about earlier, close to kickoff time, is really hard and that market is just too good to beat, then don't do it. Specialise in something. Because being the small guy comes with its advantages. You're playing at stakes levels where you can get on in markets where big pros just can't, or don't even bother looking at them. So things like single game multis, cards markets, corners, anti-post football, anti-post racing, smaller sports, your snookers, your darts, where things like that, where maybe the firms are just putting prices up for product's sake and aren't really, you know, looking at them, and they're just leaving them there. There'll be edges even for the small guy to find, and they'll last for a while because the people that bookies are really scared of aren't looking for them and playing into them. And this can be tricky because if you're sat down, the Champions League final's about to start, of course it's tempting to want to have a view on who's going to win the game and a bet on the major markets. But part of the discipline in being a good punter will be to realise where your strengths are and where they're not, and to cut out bets in the I'm not strong situations and find and focus on things that the big guys aren't doing and that you can carve out a little niche in. So yeah, that's how the smaller guy can still make it pay, I think.
Okay, Fielder Punter would like to know, as a pro punter, he assumes that you're betting in fairly large amounts of money. So how do you get on, and do you use those Asian books? Are they safe to use?
Yes, but Asian handicap markets out in assorted ways of betting into them. As a rule, yes. Firms that accept bets on Asian handicaps, yeah, a lot of stuff got UK licenses and they're absolutely fine. You'll be able to use those safely. But yes, the majority of big bets, so all day of game money has to go Asian handicaps into that sort of Asian market, because it's just impossible to the UK firms. And I don't even blame them for this. Don't want that type of business. We'll get on to the UK firms in a bit, but they aren't wanting that type of business. And so yeah, that has to go into Asia, and it has to be game day now to get any sort of size because of the way the market's changed. All right, Premier League, you can probably have a bet to win £2,000 with these firms on a Thursday, but that used to be 10 5 years ago. So the whole early market has contracted. So if you want to be Asia now, to a size in football, you've got to be betting on game day. And that's a tough but not impossible market to beat. There's people out there that say that that market's been cracked and it's impossible to beat. Only people saying that, the people that aren't doing it. It's not impossible to beat.